if a financial institution thinks there's only one option, either I issue a stablecoin or I don't issue a stablecoin, they've missed 85%, 90% of the market opportunity. There's at least 5 different ways to enter into the market. Multidimensionally, thinking outside the box, thinking about understanding the full picture is, I think, critical to do today at this moment rather than 18 months from now.
Hello, and welcome to the Dwayne Morris Money and Banking Law Podcast with Joe Silvia, brought to you by the international law firm of Dwayne Morris, LLP. I'm your host, Joe Silvia. I'm a former Federal Reserve lawyer who represents banks, fintechs, and other clients on M&A and regulatory matters at Dwayne Morris. I'm also a core member of our digital assets and blockchain practice. The goal of the Dwayne Morris Money and Banking Law Podcast is to inform and educate you, our clients and friends, on critical developments in the law and regulation of money and banking. On this, our very first episode, we are talking about the Genius Act and stablecoins. Today, I am joined by a dear friend and fellow Dwayne Morris partner, Mauro Wolfe. I'll ask Mauro to give a little more background about himself in a minute, but I just want to say I'm especially honored to have him join us today because he leads the global Dwayne Morris digital assets and blockchain practice. I'm grateful for you, Mauro, sharing some of your time with us today. Now, as our audience may know, the Genius Act was enacted into law last week and has the potential to make a significant impact on our financial system in the United States. This is just fantastic timing for us to be able to discuss such a monumental change in banking and finance because it's our first episode. So let's dive in. Mauro, can you please tell the audience a little bit about you and your practice here at Dwayne Morris?
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you so much. My background professionally is I'm a senior partner here at Dwayne Morris in New York City. My practice is 70% global. My background is a former senior enforcement attorney at the United States Securities and Exchange Commission and a former federal prosecutor in the District of New Jersey, focusing on white-collar crime. Um, I have two primary roles within Dwayne Morris as lead partner for our digital assets and blockchain group. One is I'm a spokesperson for a group of in excess of 50 lawyers that touch on digital assets from straightforward matters as real estate, immigration, to sophisticated product development, regulatory, which is my area, and litigation, capital markets, and corporate. So those are some of the areas that we cover, soup to nuts, for clients in this burgeoning area that's highly complicated and ever evolving almost minute by minute.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mauro. I appreciate that. So our digital asset and blockchain practice group has, as you know, been following these developments in the market and on Capitol Hill really minute by minute at this point. Can you give us an overview of the Genius Act as it was passed?
Sure. So the Genius Act is designed to provide regulatory clarity and oversight to the stablecoin market. Historically, had been in much of crypto has been sort of in a gray area, and even had, at least in the prior administration, sort of hostile forces adverse to the industry as a whole. At least that's the perception. So now, following January's White House release of the uh, executive order um, highlighting and identifying digital assets as a priority for the United States to lead the world in this area, this is one of the key marquee pieces of legislation. It is designed to identify rails and processes to regulate stablecoin issuers. Under the Genius Act is defined as a permitted payment stablecoin issuer. And there is a finite universe of folks that could be subsidiaries of insured depository institutions, and federally or state qualified entities approved by relevant regulators. There's a two-tier system. If you're above or at or above 10 billion, you likely to be regulated by federal oversight, and you could opt to be regulated at the state level below 10 billion. One of the key features of sort of who can be a permitted payment stable coin issuer has to do with restrictions on non-financial public companies. They are generally prohibited unless approved by the Stablecoin Certification Review Committee. I know it's a mouthful, but basically, they're the third
Yeah.
party. They're the ones who are going to bless these entities. And the reason why that's important is because there's a finite universe of, you know, credit unions and banks and financial institutions, but a much larger sector of these public companies or non financial companies that could be really important issuers of stablecoins in the future. So think of companies like um, think of Walmart or Costco or these large organizations that have extraordinarily large followings all over the world. Think about Rolex or these really important luxury brands that have an enormous following. If they were able to issue stable coins and do things in that universe. So there's a lot of excitement, obviously. The Genius Act at a very high level is really the tip of the iceberg about the systemic and what I would describe as sort of generational change we expect to see in financial markets or the potential, right? Following the Genius Act, I know we'll get into this, you're going to get into other legislation that really um, probably for us, once in our careers, we're going to see something this dramatic. Um, and considering, and I do this, and I mean this with all due respect, how boring banking and financial services can be, this is really exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely right. So if I'm one of these, non-financial companies and I'm looking at the Genius Act and stable coins and kind of really fascinated, are there any particular provisions within the Genius Act that you think are more critical than others? I mean, we'll get into how it impacts banks and such, but from a non-financial perspective, what do I need to pay attention to if I'm really thinking about issuing a stable coin or getting materially involved in this industry at this point?
Yeah, for non-banks, I think the critical issue is the regulatory registrations and obligations. I think and as you know, I know you know the answer to this because we deal with these all the time, but we have clients who fit that role of very interested in getting into the market, want to get into the market. And right now, the on-ramps for this for stable coins is very complicated and difficult. On the one hand, if you want to create a national product, a global stable coin, what's described as a full stack, soup to nuts, the whole thing, um, that could take you anywhere from 18 to 24 months. And the reason why would it take so long? The reason is because currently, even after the passing of the legislation, it's going to take some time. I know we'll get into this. So it's going to take months before you have set regulations and processes in place to allow for the issuer to be registered, right, and get approval. Currently, you can do that at the state level. The problem is you have to do that on a state by state level. So arguably, you have 48 different states, and each one's going to potentially would have its own sequence of time. So it could take another 12 to 18 months to get approval in a state like New York or Wyoming or Texas or Florida or California. And so if you want a national product or a national offering on a stable coin, you have to do that on a state by state basis. And that, frankly, is expensive and it's tedious, even when you have the ability to file a money transmitter license. And that's really the licensing trigger or optionality that you have at the state level. Even if you could do multiple states with one application, it's still going to take considerable amount of time. Um, and that has led to a possible solution. We've been in active discussions with a number of organizations that offer what are called white label products in stable coins, where they might be able to help provide the kind of services to launch your stablecoin while simultaneously you're getting those licenses or moving forward. It's very clear to me, based on the news that we're seeing on a daily basis, that financial institutions, banks, and non-banks are all racing to get into the stablecoin market and into the competition of the stablecoin race before the effective date of the stablecoin bill, before the federal, right? So you
Yeah.
have basically a window between 18 months from the date that was enacted or 120 days from the final legislation or regulation issued by the appropriate um, uh, banking regulator. And what the market, my perception, I'd love to get your take on it. My perception for the market is that all the really smart players understand that there's this gap in time, and they're trying to get in there before the effective date of the Genius Act itself.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It seems like the folks that were what I'll call first movers or early movers are going to have the largest advantage because they've already got some of the technology thought through, and now you're putting that technology into this new regulatory framework, for, especially for stable coins. And so I think the early movers, early adopters, the ones who are at least paying attention earlier than others, I think those are the ones that are going to have the advantage and really take advantage of this 18 months. Whereas if you're starting from zero, it's not that you can't do it or you shouldn't necessarily consider it. It's just that you would be well advised to get going earlier rather than later, to appreciate where the industry is right now, and where it may be in the future. And so that kind of brings me to, my next question, thinking more on the traditional finance side with banks and such. What is I have my own perspectives on what this means for banks, but from your perspective, Mauro, working on, from the SEC, DOJ, white collar perspective, running the digital asset practice at Duane Morris, where do you see this, in terms of implications for the more traditional finance and banking sector, at least in the interim between this, enactment and 18 to 24, or possibly longer months where this is actually getting rolled out and figure out how it's going to actually look from the regulator's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I suppose if I had perfect clarity, I would be doing a different job and making a lot of money. What I think is going to happen, and what we're already seeing, and what I'm hearing from the market participants, is a notion that banks are going to have um, really wonderful opportunities to get involved in digital assets, but not every bank um, is going to take advantage of that. And the question for the banks to consider, and I'm talking about not so much the largest banks, because we know that Citibank and JP Morgan and others have already, identified that they're going in this direction. But really, what I'm talking about are the regional banks and the smaller banks, and whether or not they're going to take advantage of this. Now, here's where the market opportunity is, in my view. Number one is of the different entities that are permitted to be stablecoin issuers or custodians, right? The easiest ones are banks, right? They're almost grandfathered in, almost de facto, right? So they have the least friction to get into the market. If they have the least friction to get into the market, the question is, how do they get in the market in a way that's consistent with perhaps their more traditional banking conservative philosophy? And there are lots of different ways to do that. We're having lots of conversations about that. And banks, I know, are having active conversations and have had active conversations about that. The risk, I think, that banks face and financial institutions face is, can they afford to do nothing? Can they afford to stay outside the market? We already know that before the legislation, for example, the volume of um, stablecoin transactions exceeded that of the major credit card companies in the aggregate. If that data is true, um, it is more likely, in my view, that you're going to see even more transactions in stablecoins. Now, certainly over a period of time, you're going to get a lot of stablecoin uh, uh, issuers coming into the market. Maybe they don't all survive. Maybe they come in at different points. But the bottom line is there, if a financial institution chooses not to be engaged at all in any way, Will the rest of the competitors who decide to go into the market exceed profitability, exceed um, the opportunity to grab more and more business? Because there are critical areas that on the surface or at the inception, I think are extraordinary. One is international foreign remittances, right? Being
Yep.
able to transfer money, for example, between Latin America or Africa and the United States on an instantaneous or near instantaneous basis through the use of US dollar-backed stable coins is a major game changer and is going to be a major advantage to the entities that are able to do that and not only functionally do it, but understand culturally how to enter the market and take advantage of it. And if banks are left behind and not really interested or participating in that, it's going to be difficult. And as you put noted a moment ago, waiting 18 months from now to only begin starting, you're looking at really, 36 months before you effectuate anything meaningful. And by then, you're going to have, scores of of entities entering in the stablecoin market all over the world. And all of this is global 24/7. So the opportunities are extraordinary, I think, in this space. The question is, and where I think we could provide value and where we have conversations with clients all the time is helping them understand where the opportunities are, understand the regulatory framework that's going to be helpful, and then helping, and this is the key, helping identify and introduce clients to our relationships who are consultants, who are non-lawyers, who are really developers, who provide payment processing, provides all kinds of services, including white label stablecoin services and other types of services that would help expedite the process, provide expertise on a technical best basis
Yeah.
to get to the next level and get them to their goals. But I think there's enormous risk, I think, to do nothing. And I was in Oslo, Norway, early in May, and having a conversation with about 350 international banking lawyers and asking them the very question that you asked, like what's going on in Europe? What is Europe thinking? And what was very interesting is every banker that I spoke to, or banking lawyer that I spoke to in Oslo, Norway, said Europe is waiting to see what happens with the Genius Act and what happens in the market in the United States. And what we already know is, just before the passing of the Genius Act, is we know that there is movement clearly in Europe, and the Genius Act actually contemplates reciprocity with foreign jurisdictions, which we might get into a little bit. But there's a real opportunity, I think, for foreign operators to come into the U.S.
Yeah, and I know that we've had a lot of conversations with foreign operators waiting for some clarity on either regulatory framework or stablecoin framework. So that's innumerably helpful. One of the things that as I've talked to some community bank and credit union clients and others, there's a certainly a hesitation to, I would say, get involved. But to be clear, we're not suggesting, or at least I'm not suggesting that there should be 4,000 plus bank stable coins or 4,000 plus credit union stable coins, right? Not every bank or credit union needs a stable coin. It's not necessarily appropriate for everybody. But I think what's really, and I've talked to a lot of people about this who um, are more skeptical, I'll say, right? And the really interesting thing obviously is digital asset stablecoin, how it works, what the use cases are. It's really fascinating. But to me, what is a much longer term interest is the underlying technology, and it's heavily focused on blockchain. But there's a lot of other issues that folks are still grappling with in terms of what we call on ramps, off ramps. How do you actually do the exchange from fiat to crypto, crypto back to fiat, whether it's stablecoin or other kinds of crypto? And so the technology, I think, just like banking technology changed dramatically in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that technology is again changing. And the technology is faster and it's able to handle more and more data and more transactions in a much faster way. And so, yes, to me, the stablecoin legislation is really significant for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that it propels, I think, this technology forward in a much different way than we've had in the past. A much faster adoption, hopefully, much more legitimate adoption. You know, another skepticism that we hear quite frequently from not only our bank and credit union clients, but anyone else really, is, look, isn't crypto just a way to launder money? And okay, yes, there are bad actors. There's bad actors that launder money with cash. There's bad actors that launder money with credit cards and prepaid cards, and pick your poison. It's query what the anonymity actually looks like with blockchain and so forth, and maybe that's a different episode. But I think with this legislation, it's a real opportunity for financial institutions to look at what actually exists out there for the technology, for the potential future of things like payments specifically. So with that said, the Genius Act focuses on stablecoins and that structure. And what we've already started to see and we've been seeing for a while, are reports about what are called, market structure bills, right? Legislation that looks at the broader digital asset ecosystem and really, I think, tries to address what that whole system may look like in the future for digital assets. And so I know the House passed something, and Senate's looking at a bill that's similar but not the same. And so there may be
Right.
a longer process for that type of legislation. What have you seen? I know you've been following things like Fit 21, and now we've got the Clarity Act from the House. And so, any insight on what you've seen so far? Anything that you're expecting going forward? I know I'm expecting a longer process, if nothing else, than what we saw with Genius.
Yeah, I think about 2 months ago when we were debating this, and you and I were on webinars and talking to folks in conferences. I would have predicted that you wouldn't see the passing of a market structure bill till 26. Mm. I think the first Q of 26 was what I was targeting, in part because of all the reasons that you said, like just the sheer nature of the complexity, the number of voices, competing voices, both on Capitol Hill and frankly within the industry itself.
Yeah.
Um, and I was really surprised to see that the trifecta on Capitol Hill in the House that included a prohibition on the stable coins issued by central bank, this particular bill, the Genius Act, and then the Clarity Act, all being voted on at the same time. I thought that was
Yeah.
actually incredibly surprising because it's much faster than I expected, because I didn't expect anything until 26. Um, the fact that they're competing interests, that was expected, which is why my prediction would have been 26. I actually think it's going to happen sooner than 26. I think this could be, there's going to be discussion. I think the administration and I think the leadership on the Hill wants to get this passed to demonstrate to the U.S. markets that we're open for business. I think every day that we don't have a bill, whether good, bad, or indifferent, whether the bill is good, bad, or indifferent, I think every day that passes, I think there's pressure that we're being left behind by the UAE or Singapore, Hong Kong. I can tell you that in the interim, between the time you and I had the last webinar and now, Vietnam has issued new legislation. Hong Kong has issued new legislation. UAE has issued new legislation. So you're seeing this pressure, and I think that we should expect to see that. So I would expect something in the fall, um,
Okay.
at the earliest. If it's sooner than that, that would be great. But I do think that there are lots of opportunities there, um, and to be prepared for it. and you and I are, we're always talking to the next generation of product developers and entrepreneurs who are coming up with these amazing ideas that frankly have already surpassed where the bill is it is now. And I think that um, the conversations that are happening at the SEC, particularly, which are public roundtables, where they're talking about decentralized applications. My interpretation, I know that you and I have talked about this privately, but I think one thing worth noting so everybody understands is like, look, the Clarity Act, the regulatory bills seem to suggest the SEC is going to have limited jurisdiction over 30% of the market, right? That would be my, roughly
Yeah.
70% is going to be commodities. And the CFTC has been really silent so far, and we're really looking forward to how they're going to handle it. I'm former SEC, so I know, the pros and cons and challenges of the CFTC, and some criticisms that they've faced over the years about not being really retail focused, really
Yeah.
being more institutional focused. And I think the challenge is how they're going to step up to handle 70% of the market. And amongst my clients currently includes NFT um, platforms. And the issue that I see is NFTs arguably are unregulated because they're neither a commodity because they fall under an exemption under the Clarity Act, and certainly they're not securities. So it's going to be really interesting to see where that all lands and how that all takes place. And so we're excited about that. But we're cautious about how we sort of advise clients to make sure that they're fully compliant with the regulations and the law, and that we understand exactly where things sit for them.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right, and I appreciate the comments. We're uh, constantly having conversations with folks that are really, really thinking in a different way. They're thinking in very cutting edge ways, how to use the technology, and to kind of bring it back to our money and banking law theme. You know, one thing that I've had in the back of my mind in a lot of these conversations is these folks with unique products or services or technology. They're trying to fit it in, at least at this point, into the existing regulatory framework. And how can they bring their products and services to market? And at the ultimate crux of the conversation that I've had with a lot of these folks, it's been, well, how do we partner with someone who has an existing license or a bank charter, right, or a credit union charter? How do we partner with them so that we can essentially leverage their platform and their ability to provide the broader banks and banking services, so that we can get this technology, get this particular product or service out there. And as the bank clients and credit union clients and others out there know, there's all this guidance around third party management and risk associated with it and so forth. So there's more to it than meets the eye in that case. But at the end of the day, this the Genius Act, future legislation is is really important in my opinion for banks to be paying attention to, because at the end of the day, the banks, like the famous quote goes, is where the money is. And so that's where people that are revolutionizing some of these areas of finance are going to be looking to partner, because that's where the money is. That's where the product and service development is. That's where the ability to get this out to depositors and members and other customers quickly happens. And so that's, I think, from my perspective, being kind of more of a traditional financial services lawyer, that's exactly where I see banks playing a major role, is not necessarily issuing their own stable coin, not necessarily, creating their own crypto platforms, but being um, a support mechanism for the industry and the future of finance going forward. So, um, that's kind of what I see as potential for banking and financial institutions. Mauro, this has been really fantastic. I'm really appreciative of your time. I want to be respectful of your time. You're a busy guy, and so if you have any parting thoughts, I'd love to throw it back to you to see if there's anything you
Yes.
want to leave us with.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate that. First, I agree with you 100%. I think the one message I would leave with financial institutions is that they should reach out to us to talk about understanding their options. Because I think that if a financial institution thinks there's only one option, either I issue a stable coin or I don't issue a stable coin, they've missed 85%, 90% of the market opportunity. Because there's, as you said, and it's worth highlighting, is that there's at least five different ways to enter into the market, and each of which has risks and rewards. And the very least, you could be entering into a market where, through relationships that we have, existing market participants, you can see that the yield that a bank could receive is 4% or higher, by participating in a particular an existing stable coin where they don't have to issue anything, but they're participating in it. That's worth examining, I think, for a financial institution, that may be the least um, organizationally and operationally taxing function. It could be much easier. So I think we're happy to make those introductions, happy to have those conversations to find where the right fit is, with the least amount of risk, knowing banks, and that provides the greatest opportunity. But I think, multidimensionally thinking outside the box, thinking about understanding the full picture is, I think, critical to do today at this moment rather than 18 months from now. So thank
Yeah,
you so much for the time, Joe, and for the
definitely agree.
opportunity to speak with you.
No, thank you for your time, Mauro. Before we let you go, maybe you can let the audience know how they can get in touch with you, either email, phone, whatever's best. If you could just let them know what your contact info might be, and we can let them get into you.
Yeah, so my number is 212-692-1017 in New York City. You can also Google me, and my email address is mmwolfe, WOLFE, at DwayneMorris.com. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I respond 24/7, just like the internet, and crypto.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks, Mauro. That's all for today. Thanks again to Mauro Wolfe, our lead partner for Dwayne Morris's digital asset and blockchain practice, on our first official podcast. What a timely podcast it is. Thanks for listening in to the audience. I appreciate it. If you have any questions from any of our episodes, you heard Mauro provide his information. You can also reach out to me at jsilvia@dwaynemorris.com, or otherwise you can reach out to another of your favorite Dwayne Morris lawyers. Uh, that's all for today. Stay tuned for new episodes coming soon. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.